Hey, welcome back to Music Theory Logic. My name's Andrew, and today is going to be another music theory breakdown. Today we're talking about Bangarang by the legend Skrillex. Let's go ahead into the logic session. So, if you haven't seen one of these before, basically I recreate popular songs from start to finish. I'm not going to play the original song since I don't have the copyright, or I don't want to get this video flagged. I am going to then talk about the scale and the music theory stuff that's going on in this so that hopefully you better understand this track. If you haven't heard Bangarang in a while, maybe pause this, go check out the original. If you find these breakdowns to helpful, you would help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. Let's go ahead and listen to the recreation. Here's my version of Bangarang by Skrillex.
Boy, I'm a boy's boy, green rowdy. I'm a boy's boy, I'm a boy's boy, green rowdy. I'm a boy's boy, I'm a boy's boy, green rowdy. I'm a boy's boy, I'm a boy's boy.
I'm a voice boy, green rowdy. Drops on my voice boy. Drops on my voice boy, green rowdy. Drops on my voice boy. Drops on my voice boy, green rowdy. Drops on my voice boy. Drops on my voice boy. Bass.
Nice. So obviously it's not 100% like as exciting as the original. I wouldn't even pretend that I could recreate this fully to the quality of the original. This is one of the most prolific, 2010, 2012 dubstep tracks of all time. I believe this won a Grammy as well. So the vocals you're hearing are me. I know that I do not sound like the original, but I moved the pitch to try to replicate what's going on in the track. So let's talk about the music theory. This song is in the key of G minor. G minor has the notes G, A, B flat, black key, C, D, E flat, F, and G. that sounds like this. And essentially, every riff from the song is going to use one of those notes. So this is a great example of how like a really basic amount of music theory, just the knowledge of scale stuff, will really help you a lot when trying to write interesting sections. So this original has a lot of guitar in it. The guitar you're hearing is all MIDI based. I did that so we can look at it. So let's go ahead and look at the main layers in our intro. It starts out just holding a G. That is the one note from our scale. It's not holding it, rather it's playing a rhythm. That rhythm has some syncopation in it. Syncopation is basically where we displace an accent. So like right here in the song, instead of it being on the one or the one and, there's kind of a hierarchy where the first of four is most important, the halfway through is second most important, and then the 16th notes, third most important. But essentially, when we place an accent on one of those other 16th notes lower in the hierarchy, it's going to give what's called syncopation, specific word for like the displacement of an accent. So all the notes together, we've got the first guitar is holding a G. It sounds like this. Then guitar 2 comes in. Guitar 2 is basically playing a G and up to a B flat. So together, what that does is it makes it sound like the one chord, which is G minor, has G, B flat, and D. Second guitar looks like this. Looks like that, but sounds like this. Sorry. So one of the like things I could just say about like if you want to write something like this, basically there's some interesting rhythmic stuff happening on both layer, but the note values are all coming from the same sort of harmony. So that together really creates a cool texture that again sounds like a G minor chord. Then the next melodic thing we have that happens is this keyboard. I'm just using the electric keyboard default in Logic. It's going from the one note G up to B flat, that's the 3 in G minor, to C, that's the 4th, up to D, that's the 5. So we're kind of walking up the scale. That works with the other notes that we just saw. This C is not in the chord, that one I mentioned, but it is in our scale. Altogether, those sound like this. I'll play it from the beginning. So here's just the guitar 1. Here comes guitar 2. That would be where the drums start. So back to that idea of syncopation, let's go back to our third electric keyboard riff. So the first time it begins on the 1. The second time it begins on the second 8th note. This is really common in a lot of hip hop or just like popular music influenced by that, where like the first measure is on the 1, second measure we hit on the second 8th note, so the whole pattern doesn't repeat until the second measure. So the one different thing that's happening is we're going G, B flat up to C. All that's the same, only instead of going up to D, we play an A. So all together, that on its own sounds like this. Cool. So let's talk about some of the rhythmic stuff happening in our drums. So back to that term syncopation. We're at 110 beats per minute. We could call this kind of mid-tempo, or we would call it mid-tempo. This kick drum's hitting on the beat 1, beat 2, so like 4 on the floor-ish for that part. So 1, 2, and then the second half of the measure is a syncopated rhythm. We could call this 8th note triplets. What that means is basically these 3 fit into the same space that 4 8th notes did before. If we were in a 16th note grid, that would be hitting the 1, the 4th 16th note. So 1, 2, 3, the 4th 16th note. And then the next quarter note, we're hitting on the 2nd 8th note. This is a really common rhythm, and you'll run into it a lot. I use it in a lot of my music. On a side note, this is also like the basis for a reggaeton sort of groove as well. So people like to dance to this kind of music, and this is dance music, so that makes sense. In addition to the kick drum, we basically just have a clap happening on the 2nd and the 4th beat. We call that a standard backbeat. I always link to my music theory text below in the rhythmic chapter, which is, I think, chapter 2. Talk about standard, halftime, and other backbeats. And this is essentially the most standard of all, beat 2 and 4. Then we basically have a reverse cymbal coming that's like an uplifter into the drums. And then finally, we have a crash on beat 1. Altogether, that sounds like this.
That's all my voice boy. That's all my voice boy. Green rowdy. That's all my voice boy. That's all my voice boy.
Now the clap is super back in the mix. It gets a lot more upfront when it's replaced by a snare in the next section. So we get the vocals. There's some filtering opening up. Then we get the famous, bangarang, and then we go straight into the drop. One of the cool things about this track is the sort of like unique or the structure that's really built for listening as opposed to an edit that's really built purely for DJing. So perhaps adds to the success of this track. So let's talk about the drums on the drop section. Our kick drum goes to beat 1 and beat 3. So this is like halftime 4 on the floor you can think of, or 4 half notes on the floor every other measure. There's not really a term for that, but that's basically what's happening. Then our cymbals are on the upbeat, so the 2nd 8th note. Now, if I were to zoom in here, we'll notice that they're out of time. They're also out of time with the actual song. They're slightly early. That creates a real human feel to the song, as does the live tracked guitar sound. Finally, we get a bigger snare that's replacing the former one. The rhythm is exactly the same, so we're on beat 2 and 4. Cool. The drums on their own aren't that interesting, but we'll listen to the drums and the sub on their own. Now, the sub, there's lots of people that have talked about this with regards to Skrillex's music, but most of his tracks, not only are the arrangements super exciting and creative, not only is the sound design like really big, or at least contextually to the time period, really like revolutionary. Lots of people have copied this, including myself in later years, but that's what happens with seminal music producers like Skrillex. So what he does in a lot of his tracks is has like really interesting sub stuff. It makes sense because this is kind of like on a big system what you're going to be feeling in your chest. Note-wise, it's basically holding the one note, a G, for the first most of, 3.5 measures. Then we go up to this fill. It's up, skipping a whole octave up, which really makes it stick out as a sort of like a bass stab fill. It's going to go up to the 5, then the 4, that's D, then C. Let's watch that sub while we hear the drums. So I'm going to solo out our various layers. 1 second. There we go. And let's watch the sub. Sometimes we hear this, so we could change the fill. All right, the final thing you're hearing, this line below, this is our pitch bend automation. Depending upon the DAW or digital audio workstation, the computer program you're using to make beats or make music, where this is located might be different. It will be different, but essentially you're going to be looking for the pitch bend parameter for MIDI. So if you find that pitch bend parameter, you can then draw a line on the pitch and you can create subtle pitch bends or going down, which is what I did at the end of that note. So it's going down. Cool. So I'm not going to go into really the specific bass design for this. Just like the Noisia video, I'm going to do a breakout video purely about building these basses. I know they're not 100% accurate to the original. I don't think Sirah even existed when Skrillex made this track, so I'm using different tools, but there's a lot going on there, so I'm not going to make this a sound design video. But in essence, if we just look at the notes that are happening together, we have an affected guitar happening on beat 1. It's basically playing our 1 chord. G, D, G, D. It's a power chord, so we're skipping the 3rd note. That whenever we're making like really like heavy textures, if it's like rock and roll, punk rock, this track, dubstep, mid-tempo, I don't know what we want to call this, EDM, but getting rid of the 3rd can get rid of like muddiness in the chords, so it makes sense that that's what's happening. And then it's the G chord, then we're basically hitting a D. That's the synth. Different synth. Then we're going down to our 3 finally on the 2nd measure. And then finally, our bass has the fill right here. So it's basically the 1, the 5, the 3, then the bass fill. The 1, the 5, the 3, then the bass fill. All together, it sounds like this. So on top of that, there's the vocals happening. Again, I'm not really even going to spend much time talking about those at all. I tried my best to recreate the vocals. I know it's not perfect, but at least helps us to like place where all the other stuff is happening based on it. Essentially, I used Little Altar Boy by Sound Toys to move the pitch and formats up to try to mimic that Skrillex sound. In the other layer, I'm using Sound Shifter from Waves to push the pitch up. And then the final one, I'm just using Little Altar Boy, so I created a full layer. Again, not perfect, but helps us know where everything else holds. So we're going to skip through here. So we just talked about the intro, the first drop. Then after that, we go back into a shorter version, basically, of the intro. This is kind of like a breakdown / build-up. It's 8 measures long. Musically, we don't have anything that we didn't have before aside from a riser. So we have the same keyboard riff right away that I talked about. We don't have any of the guitars until the last 3 measures, or the last 4 measures, skipping the final of those 4. And that is guitar 2. So we don't hear the guitar 1, the fast rhythm of the 1 note, the G. And then finally, we have a riser that's basically noise that I created in Sirah. Then we go into drop 2. Drop 2 musically isn't much different. However, it is quite different in terms of the sound design. So note-wise, we're basically doing the 1, G, G. We're going up to the 5, back to the 1, and then up to the 1 an octave higher. So the notes have changed in terms of their order, but the actual values haven't changed. You'll notice in the song we're really using G, B flat, and D a ton. Our subline hasn't changed. The difference is that we don't have the fill, because in the place of the fill, we get like one of the coolest sections, which has, let's see if I can find all the layers, which has a cool stutter walk down, where it's going to go D to the vocal chop, G to the vocal chop, down to G with an interesting rhythm. That sounds like this. So that's a section that really, like, I feel like helps doing these breakdowns or just recreating an instrumental. When you listen to it, it's really hard. It's almost like ear candy. Our brains aren't equipped to really like process everything that's happening at the same time, which creates a really cool like sensory overload, or at least for me, it's part of the reason I love this music. So that's what's happening there. So that happens at the end of every 4 measures. And then we get a new guitar. This is something that I also didn't really notice until doing this breakdown. But if you listen to the second drop and the third drop, you're going to hear an additional guitar layer. We haven't heard this before. It's basically doing the 1 up to the 1 in octave pattern, but in the context of the drop, sounds pretty cool. I'll play it from the 4 measures before, and we'll look at the guitar. Sorry, one sec. Here we go. So here comes that guitar. So the guitar does the octave pattern that I was mentioning, basically like eighth notes, 1 and 2, and it doesn't happen for the next 2 quarter notes, and then that repeats. At the end of the 4, the same part, we have the really cool fill section I just talked about. The guitar doubles up what the bass had been doing before. That creates a really cool texture. We're not introducing any new notes, but we're introducing new tones, so that sound design-wise makes it develop. Cool. Moving along here. After the second drop, we get what is my favorite section of the whole song. This new bass line. I'll play it. It sounds like this. All right. So a couple things happening. One, we basically get that keyboard riff, only it's happening on a synth, somewhat of a super saw synth. What that means is multiple voices playing with the D tune of a basic sort of saw. So I'm using a subby saw. Again, this isn't a sound design video, but in essence, that is kind of how we're creating, that sound. So a basic mini first wavetable, and then I'm using, again, 4 voices with the D tune. That creates the parallel sound. I'm also using some hyper dimension expander that I'm automating with my LFO. So stay tuned. We're going to post a breakdown of just the sound design on this so we can better understand starting to build these sounds, even though they're not 100% accurate. I'm sure someone will take what I'm showing you here and make it even cooler. That's kind of my goal, to do what I can to help push music forward, even if it's not through giant hit records. I'm working on that, but at the very least, maybe one of my viewers out there make a hit record with this information, so we can all rock out to it. So the bass line changes. We go down to E flat. So this is like the 6. This is for the first time we hear this E flat note. It's in our scale. It has a major tonality based on it. So when we hear the E flat, the G, and the B flat, that sounds like an E flat major chord. We call that the major 6. So you'll notice at that breakdown section, when we come out of it, something feels like happy about it, like feels good. Feel that, like, kind of feels happy. That is achieved through some basic music theory. Again, it's a major chord tonality. It feels extra impactful because we haven't heard this note before. This note works because it's from our scale, all of those things. So we get basically a different bass line. It happens on a 2-measure cycle. So this is more sustained or drawn out than some of the former sections. So we're going that 6 up to the 1, up to the 4, and then finally up to the 1 up an octave. Since we don't hear the 1 note in the beginning of the cycle, it kind of displaces our sense of G minor. It makes it feel happier for that moment. The one other thing I want to mention is on that super saw, playing again the keyboard riff, no different notes here. One of the really important things about it is the sort of pseudo vibrato. And I'm adding some vibrato via the pitch bend automation from the MIDI controls that I mentioned before with regards to the sub. We're using that on the last note, and if you listen to the original, you're going to hear a lot of like vibrato right there. Coming out of this section, we get what is a true sort of breakdown, since this has the same drums that are happening. It's not as much of a breakdown. We get a huge crash. We get that beginning of like the bangarang, like bang, all together. Then we get some other riffs happening. So one, we have this descending chord sequence. It's a power chord. It's on that sounds like a talking bass. So we're basically going 1, 7, 6, just going down the scale with that parallel fifth, or power chord as a guitar player might call it. We stay on the 6th, the E flat here. Again, this that E flat really gives us sort of a major sound when we have these other notes happening. So in essence, the other stuff is we have the 5th note from our scale, the D, repeated. We've got that guitar riff, so let's just solo out the guitar riff. This is a new guitar riff that's happening. We're going G, D, C, D, G, D. Sounds like this. It's repeating. So one thing this section demonstrates is like if you have the same melody or simple riff that's happening. So this is all just really on the G minor, the 1, 5, 4, 5, 1, 5, repeating every measure. That nothing's changing there, but the actual bass notes that I showed you in the beginning are changing via the talking bass descending line. That all together creates a really cool sound. I've mentioned it before in these breakdowns, but I really like to do that in my tracks. If you listen to The Future Is Yours by yours truly, d.r.u. If you listen to that track, you'll notice that the melody stays the same in the intro section, but then the bass starts to move. It's a technique that I really like the sound of, and we find it in a lot of songs. So it's an example of seeing these sort of music theory principles. All right, so that covers all of the different notes that are happening. Now, there's a new percussion thing that's happening. It's really subtle. This is, I'm calling it break percussion. It almost doesn't even sound like a percussion note. I'm using... But it's really just this subtle perk, and if you listen to the whole instrumental, you'll notice that right after the bass section that I really like, the breakdown, we find that. So this is another example of like a really subtle layer from this track that without the song would not be the same. So all of these different subtle nuances to the track, I think, are part of what make it like such a cool song and interesting to listen to time and time again. When I first heard this, it really kind of blew my mind, like many people around the world. So I've covered everything. The one thing I kind of glossed over was something that happens in the cymbal, the second half of every single drop. So the drums are the same for each of the drop sections. That creates a lot of consistency. Now, halfway through each drop section, let's look at that first drop, our cymbals, instead of just playing the 2nd, 8th note, we get the 16th note right after that. So that's something that picks up the energy in the drop. You heard it when I played it, but I just wanted to make sure I touched on that. So again, halfway through the drop, we get that faster cymbal pattern. Now, the final drop is basically the same as drop 2. So we only hear drop 1 first time, then a breakdown, build up, drop 2, big breakdown section and build up, then drop 2 again. One of the differences is really just the mix or the mastering. This last section feels the biggest. Cool. So halfway through, those drums pick up. I'll just play that so you can hear it.
You feel good.
That's the drum. So that cymbal movement, again, just makes it more exciting. We also hear that new guitar that comes in that I showed you. And yeah, that basically covers everything. So once again, we're in the key of G minor. G minor has G, A, B flat, C, D, E flat, F, and G. There were no notes that were outside of that key. The layering was a huge part of this this instrumental and the arrangement. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you found this helpful, you would help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. If you do, you'll see that I come out with these breakdowns every Friday. I come out with another piece of content earlier in the week. Follow me on my social media to get other free presets, free tips for your production skills, and just to connect. And let's all be kind to our fellow human beings and just make music, because that's what this is all, the point of all of this. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. Make some awesome music, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.